You've probably heard the story before, that the Osireion is thousands of years older than history says, that it's proof of lost technology, of a civilization wiped from memory. But what if I told you the entire theory started with a mistake, and it was debunked over a century ago?
For decades, the Osireion has remained one of Egypt's most mysterious monuments. Its unusual design, enormous stones, and strange construction have sparked endless curiosity and debate. But recent discoveries have taken this mystery in a completely new direction, revealing clues that have surprised researchers and raised even more questions. So after all these years, what was actually discovered? Join us in this video as we look into these discoveries. The Osireion's unexpected mystery. The Osireion has puzzled researchers for decades, but recent discoveries have given this ancient mystery an unexpected new direction. Deep within the ancient city of Abydos stands a structure that seems completely out of place. Visitors come to see the magnificent Temple of Seti I, an extraordinary monument built during the 13th century BC, but hidden just beyond its limestone walls is something entirely different. It is known as the Osireion. Unlike the beautifully carved temple beside it, this monument is built from enormous granite blocks, so massive that even today they leave engineers asking difficult questions. The stones are so heavy that it is hard to imagine how ancient builders could have lifted them without modern cranes, let alone transported them across vast stretches of desert. That is exactly why the Osireion remains one of the greatest mysteries in ancient Egypt. Mainstream archaeologists identify it as a symbolic tomb dating to the 19th dynasty. But there is one major problem with that explanation. The architecture looks nothing like other monuments from the same period. In fact, it doesn't closely resemble any other known Egyptian structure. Because of that, some researchers have argued that the Osireion may not have been built by the Egyptians at all, but by an earlier civilization whose history has long been forgotten. If that were true, who were those builders, and why has no clear evidence of them ever been found? The Osireion appears to exist in the wrong place, during the wrong period, and according to some, within the wrong chapter of history. To understand why this debate refuses to disappear, we first have to travel back to the earliest beginnings of Egyptian civilization. According to archaeology, civilization in the Nile Valley did not appear overnight. Instead, it developed gradually over tens of thousands of years through many different cultures. Around 120,000 BC, the Acheulean culture occupied this region. These early human ancestors survived using simple stone tools and lived relatively basic lives. Then, around 45,000 BC, the Cormicen culture appeared in the southern Sahara. These were early Homo sapiens who gradually migrated toward the fertile Nile Valley as the surrounding desert became increasingly dry. By around 32,000 years ago, they had begun making tools from bone and producing objects from hematite, showing clear signs of technological progress. Then, approximately 18,000 years ago, an even more advanced society appeared in the Nile Valley. Archaeologists know them as the Khadan culture. These people were among the earliest Neolithic communities, establishing more permanent settlements and constructing some of the region's first megalithic structures. This stage of Egypt's development lasted from roughly 15,000 BC until around 10,000 BC. Scientists know the Khadan people existed because they have uncovered the remains of many of their settlements across the Nile Valley. Numerous archaeological discoveries preserve evidence of how they lived and how their society gradually evolved. This slow progression, from early stone tool-using humans to the increasingly advanced Khadan culture, is supported by decades of archaeological research. Researchers also believe the Khadan gradually developed into what eventually became a Proto-Egyptian culture. They were probably the first people in Egypt to make serious progress toward agriculture. Evidence shows they gathered, processed, and ate wild grasses, while also beginning to cultivate early grains. Their weapons and tools became increasingly advanced, allowing them to hunt larger animals and fish more successfully than earlier populations. Yet despite all of these advances, archaeologists have found no evidence that they possessed the technology or engineering ability needed to quarry, transport, or position enormous granite blocks like those found inside the Osireion. As the centuries passed, the Khadan people also learned to produce pottery and weave baskets with increasing skill. They developed distinctive burial customs that included some of the earliest known forms of tombs anywhere in the world. These communities also created sickles for harvesting crops and grinding stones for processing food more efficiently. Eventually, over many generations, the Khadan culture gradually transformed into what archaeologists call the Fayum culture, around 6000 BC. The most widely accepted explanation is that migrants from the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia entered Egypt, bringing with them improved farming methods and new agricultural knowledge. A recent DNA study, which was discussed, provides strong evidence supporting this idea, so be sure to watch that after this one. Researchers found that early Egyptians shared genetic ancestry with both North African populations and people from Mesopotamia, creating a blended population over time. Then, around 6,400 years ago, the Fayum culture began developing clear social hierarchies. Leadership almost certainly existed before then, because organized societies naturally create leaders. However, by around 4,400 BC, these communities had established recognized chieftains who governed their growing populations. According to the archaeological record, this gradual progression eventually gave rise to the civilization that would become dynastic Egypt. And that is exactly where the Osireion becomes so difficult to explain. Following the history of the Osireion that has sparked so much mystery, let's take a closer look at what was discovered. Keep watching to find out. The mystery beneath the stones. At first glance, the Osireion appears impossibly ancient, perhaps even pre-dynastic. Its massive stone blocks, unusual architectural style, and mysterious atmosphere seem to place it in a forgotten chapter of Egyptian history. So why do Egyptologists argue something completely different? This contradiction has remained one of the most fascinating debates surrounding the monument. To understand this mystery, researchers turn to the evidence preserved through archaeology. Living in Luxor provides access to one of the greatest centers of Egyptological research in the world. Only minutes away from the Theban Mapping Project Library, a major hub where leading Egyptologists gather to study ancient Egyptian monuments, important discussions about the Osireion have taken place for decades. Among those researchers was Dr. Kent Weeks, one of the most respected Egyptologists of the modern era, and the archaeologist who uncovered K55, the largest tomb ever discovered in the Valley of the Kings. His interpretation of the Osireion challenged many popular theories surrounding the structure. Rather than viewing it as evidence of a forgotten civilization, he identified it as a funerary monument connected to the 19th dynasty. Through archives, excavation records, and primary sources, a clearer picture began to emerge. Dr. Weeks explained that while the Osireion belongs to the New Kingdom period, its design appears to preserve much older religious traditions, possibly even concepts that originated during the pre-dynastic era. He also pointed toward Nakin, the ancient city where the famous Narmer Palette was discovered, suggesting that future excavations in the region could reveal more information about the early traditions that influenced the Osireion. However, when examining the actual architecture, his conclusion remained clear. The structure itself follows design principles closely connected to New Kingdom royal tombs. As more archaeological studies were examined, the same pattern continued to appear. Excavation reports, academic papers, and detailed research all contributed to a much more complex picture of the monument. Studies such as Peter Brand's work on Egyptian monuments, Keith Hamilton's Guide to the Osireion, and numerous other publications provided valuable insight into its construction and purpose. Keith Hamilton, who later participated in Adept Expeditions tours, emphasized an important point. The achievements of ancient Egypt should not be viewed only through the achievements of the Old Kingdom. While the pyramids remain some of Egypt's greatest accomplishments, the Middle Kingdom and New Kingdom also produced extraordinary architects, engineers, and builders capable of creating some of history's most impressive monuments. Another major contribution came from Charles Hertzer's extensive 5-volume study, one of the most detailed modern examinations of the Osireion ever produced. Together, these sources created a growing body of evidence that challenged many popular assumptions about the monument. The more researchers examined the archaeological record, the clearer the picture became. But understanding a monument like the Osireion requires more than written records alone. Ancient structures reveal details that cannot always be captured in books or photographs. Their scale, atmosphere, and design become far more meaningful when experienced directly. What evidence convinced so many people that the Osireion was something far older than history suggests? Stay tuned to find out. The stones that changed the story of the Osireion. The central chamber of the Osireion is where the real debate truly begins. This is the space where light, water, and enormous granite blocks come together in one of the most unusual architectural environments in all of Egypt. For generations, this chamber has confused visitors, researchers, and historians alike. And at the center of the controversy is one thing above all else: the stone itself. When people look at the massive granite pillars standing inside the Osireion, they often reach the same immediate conclusion: this must be from the Old Kingdom. But that assumption comes from focusing on only one feature: the granite. And the reality is far more complicated. At first glance, many people argue that the Osireion does not resemble anything else found in ancient Egyptian architecture, with perhaps the closest comparison being the Valley Temple of Khafra at the Giza Plateau. But this conclusion comes from looking only at the surface appearance of the monument. When the details are examined more carefully, a very different picture begins to emerge. Look beneath the massive pillars. The enormous granite columns are not standing on a granite floor. They are resting on a sandstone platform. The floor beneath them is sandstone. The surrounding architectural foundation is sandstone. The granite was carefully placed on top of this sandstone base, and that small detail changes the entire discussion. Sandstone was not widely used for major monumental construction during Egypt's earliest periods. Its large-scale use became much more common during the Middle Kingdom. Before that time, it was not a typical material choice for massive architectural projects. So when people look at the Osireion and say, it contains granite, therefore it must be extremely ancient, they are focusing on only one part of a much larger story. The assumption that larger stones automatically mean an older structure is not always accurate. Size alone does not determine age. The materials, construction methods, and archaeological context all matter. And when those details are considered together, the evidence begins pointing toward a different conclusion. The granite blocks of the Osireion were placed upon a sandstone foundation, suggesting a construction style that belongs to a much later period than many people originally believed. Rather than proving that the monument existed before the Old Kingdom, the materials reveal something much more interesting. This was not simply an attempt to copy the past. It was part of a deliberate religious revival known as the Wahim Mesut, a movement focused on restoring ancient traditions, renewing Egypt's connection with its earliest beliefs, and returning to Ma'at, the cosmic balance and universal order that Egyptians believed maintained harmony after the dramatic religious changes introduced during the reign of Akhenaten. And this is where the true irony appears. People see granite and immediately think of the Old Kingdom. They see enormous blocks and assume incredible age. But the evidence suggests something different. Seti I of the 19th dynasty was not simply borrowing the achievements of earlier kings. He was honoring ancient traditions while proving that the builders of his own time possessed extraordinary skill and ambition. He was moving enormous sandstone blocks, constructing a massive foundation, and then carefully placing gigantic granite pillars on top of it. He was not only imitating the Old Kingdom, in many ways, he was competing with it. Could the Osireion still be hiding secret chambers that have fueled mystery and curiosity for centuries? Keep watching to find out. The hidden chambers of the Osireion. As the journey through the Osireion continues, the deeper you move into the monument, the more its hidden purpose begins to reveal itself. Beyond the entrance corridors and beneath the massive stones lies a series of carefully designed chambers, each one carrying clues about the rituals, beliefs, and architectural traditions that shaped this mysterious structure. The Osireion was not simply a collection of rooms carved into the earth. Every turn, every passage, and every chamber appears to have served a specific role within a much larger religious vision. The builders were not only creating a physical space, but a symbolic world where ideas of death, rebirth, kingship, and cosmic order could be recreated through ritual. And as the path leads further inward, the details become even more revealing. The deeper you go, the more the monument begins to challenge the simple explanations often given to it. The corridors, chambers, and inscriptions are not random features placed together by chance. They form part of a carefully planned design that connects the Osireion to some of the most important religious traditions of ancient Egypt. At the end of the corridor, a small chamber opens before you. In ancient times, this room would have been illuminated only by the flickering glow of torchlight, with shadows moving across the stone walls as priests carried out sacred rituals. Today, however, it stands open to the sky, allowing sunlight to enter a space that was once hidden in darkness. On the walls, a powerful scene appears. Horus is shown presenting an offering to his father Osiris, who sits upon a throne holding a curved flail in his hand, appearing as a powerful king among the gods. And just beside the doorway leading into the next chamber, another important detail emerges. The name Menmatre appears once again, referring to Seti I. However, this time, it is not enclosed inside a cartouche, the traditional oval frame used to highlight royal names. Because of this unusual placement, it was likely overlooked by earlier researchers who were searching for the familiar oval symbols of pharaohs, rather than a name carved openly into the stone itself. Yet this small detail provides another important piece of evidence connecting Seti I to the monument. Even after centuries of erosion, damage, and uncertainty, the presence of the pharaoh remains. This chamber may appear small, but it contains a major architectural clue. It appears in royal tombs from the 18th dynasty, including the tombs of Thutmose III, Amenhotep II, and Thutmose IV. These royal tombs followed a distinctive layout known as a bent-axis design. Instead of continuing in a straight line, these tombs began with a direct passage before suddenly turning, often at an angle of 90 degrees or more, as they moved deeper into the earth. This design was not accidental. Large burial objects, especially massive stone sarcophagi, were extremely difficult to move through narrow underground corridors. These turning chambers created a practical space where priests could carefully rotate the coffin and continue carrying it forward into the deeper sections of the tomb. And here, the Osireion follows the same principle. A sharp right-angled turn appears at the end of the corridor, a feature that closely reflects the architecture of royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. But this space was not only practical. This chamber was not used only once for a burial ceremony. Instead, priests returned here during specific religious occasions, making it part of the repeated ritual activity that gave the Osireion its deeper meaning. This chamber represented the final stage of two of the Osireion's three major ritual cycles. The first was a nightly cycle that recreated the journey of the sun god Ra through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. Each night, Ra was believed to travel through darkness before being reborn at sunrise, representing renewal and the victory of life over death. The second was a monthly ritual cycle connected to the final visible crescent of the moon and the ceremonies surrounding the beginning of a new lunar cycle. The third ritual cycle took place in the central hall, the most important space within the Osireion. Together, these ceremonies formed part of a larger religious restoration movement known as the Wahim Mest, meaning the renewal of birth or the beginning of a new era. This movement represented a return to older traditions connected with Egypt's earliest kings and a restoration of Ma'at, the cosmic balance and order believed to maintain harmony throughout creation. These rituals were not simply acts of remembering the past. They represented a political and spiritual renewal, a way of restoring harmony between the gods, the king, and the universe itself. For ancient Egyptians, maintaining these ceremonies was not just about preserving tradition. It was believed to be part of maintaining the balance of existence itself. But beyond this chamber, the journey continues. The path leads deeper into darkness, taking you farther beneath the surface and closer to the hidden world of Osiris. Could the mystery of the Osireion be connected to even greater ancient mysteries that have fueled countless theories? Stay tuned to find out. The Osireion's connection to Osiris. The story begins with one of the most powerful myths in ancient Egypt, the story of Osiris, the god who experienced death, destruction, and ultimately resurrection. According to Egyptian mythology, Osiris was betrayed and murdered, and his body was torn apart and scattered. But through the incredible power and magic of Iset, better known as Isis, his body was recovered, restored, and his spirit was brought back from death. Isis then transformed herself into the form of a kite bird, hovering above Osiris as she performed the act that would lead to the birth of their son, Horus. This moment represented one of the most important beliefs in ancient Egyptian religion, the idea that death was not the end, but a transformation into a new state of existence. Osiris represented the deceased king, the ruler who had passed into the realm of the gods. Horus represented the living king, the ruler who continued his father's legacy on earth. Through this divine resurrection, kingship was transferred from father to son. The dead god was restored, and through that restoration, life, power, and authority continued through the living ruler. And at the very center of this transformation was one of the most powerful symbols connected to death and rebirth, the lion-headed bier. But what exactly was a bier? A bier was a raised platform used in ancient Egyptian funerary rituals, especially during the process of embalming and the period when the body was prepared before burial. However, in Egyptian belief, it represented far more than a simple resting place for the dead. It was a sacred platform where death transformed into eternity. These ritual beds were often designed in the shape of lions, powerful creatures associated with strength, protection, and the eternal power of the sun. A typical lion-headed bier featured the head of a lion at each end, while the body of the animal formed the structure of the platform itself. This powerful symbol appears repeatedly throughout ancient Egyptian art, appearing in tomb paintings, royal coffins, and temple reliefs across Egypt. One of the most famous examples comes from the tomb of King Tutankhamun, where Anubis is shown resting on top of a lion-headed bier inside the burial chamber. This was not simply an artistic symbol carved into a wall. It was a real object, carefully preserved and used as part of the actual funerary process. The symbolism of the lion carried deep meaning. It represented power, protection, and the endless journey of the sun through the sky each day. Within funerary rituals, the lion became a symbol of triumph over death, acting as a guardian between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. It represented the soul's passage through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, where transformation and rebirth took place before reaching the afterlife. Now, return to the Osireion. Inside this chamber is a long, narrow, deeply carved recess built into the stone. Its shape and dimensions appear to closely match the form of a lion-headed bier. And this is where the connection becomes extremely intriguing. This does not appear to be just a coincidence or a random architectural feature. Instead, it may represent ritual architecture, a physical space designed around specific religious beliefs and ceremonies. Above this chamber, within the temple of Seti I, the same symbolic scene appears repeatedly. Throughout ancient Egypt, the imagery follows the same pattern. Osiris lying upon the lion-headed bier, with Isis beside him, transformed into a kite bird hovering above. In this sacred moment, Isis takes the form of the bird and connects with Osiris, resulting in the conception of Horus, the divine son who represents the continuation of kingship and life. This was not merely an artistic representation. It was not just a story carved into stone. It was a ritual. And according to this interpretation, the Osireion may have been designed as the very place where this powerful symbolism of death, resurrection, and divine rebirth was brought to life. Could the mystery of the Osireion hold a deeper significance that has sparked even more curiosity about this ancient monument? Stay tuned to find out. The Osireion's connection to resurrection. A resurrection chamber carved directly into stone. And what better centerpiece could exist at the heart of such a sacred space than a lion-headed bier placed exactly where this transformation was meant to take place? Not a simple granite column, not just another piece of ancient architecture, but a powerful symbol representing the return of a god from death into life. When the pieces are placed together, a clear pattern begins to emerge. The myth, the design of the monument, the temple above, and the concept of sacred kingship below all appear connected. The more the Osireion is studied, the more it becomes clear that this structure represents something far greater than a single Egyptian monument. The ritual pattern preserved within the Osireion appears again and again across different civilizations and throughout human history. A god dies, a god descends, a god returns. The names may change, the cultures may be separated by thousands of years. Dionysus, Tammuz, Jesus, Osiris. Yet beneath these different traditions lies a remarkably similar idea. Death is not the final destination, but a passage toward transformation and renewal. To understand why these symbols are so important, we need to look closer at the three central elements that appear throughout these traditions. First, the bed of death and stillness. Inside the Osireion, the lion-headed bier is not simply an artistic detail carved into a sacred space. It represents the heart of the ritual symbolism itself. Osiris does not rest inside a sealed coffin hidden away from view. Instead, he lies upon a platform, exposed in stillness, waiting for the moment of transformation and rebirth. This idea appears in other ancient traditions as well. Within the mystery traditions connected with Dionysus, the suffering, death, and restoration of the god were remembered through symbolic rituals. His body was believed to have been destroyed and later restored. Through these ceremonies, followers entered altered states of consciousness, symbolically experiencing the journey of the god himself, moving from death toward renewal. In Christianity, Jesus is placed upon a stone burial surface after his death. His death is real, but it is not permanent. The place where his body rests becomes more than a location of burial. It becomes a sacred threshold, a point between two states of existence where stillness gives way to resurrection. Second, the cave of darkness, protection, and mystery. The Osireion itself functions like a symbolic cave. It is carved deep beneath the earth, requiring a descent into darkness before reaching its most sacred spaces. This physical journey reflects the mythological descent of Osiris into the Dua, the Egyptian underworld. The image of the cave appears repeatedly throughout ancient beliefs. In traditions surrounding Dionysus, the infant god is hidden within a cave where he is protected, preserved, and prepared for his future role. Later, mystery traditions continued using the cave as a symbol of transformation, a hidden place where an individual leaves behind one state of existence and emerges into another. The same symbolism appears in Christianity. The tomb is also presented as a cave-like space. It is sealed with stone, surrounded by darkness, and associated with death. Yet it does not represent an ending. Instead, it becomes a passageway between death and new life. Death enters, life emerges. Third, water as a symbol of rebirth and cosmic return. At the Osireion, water is not simply present by chance. It surrounds and rises within the monument, becoming one of the most important elements of its design and symbolism. This water connects with the ancient Egyptian concept of Nun, the endless primordial ocean believed to exist before creation itself. From these waters, the first act of creation emerged. Because of this, water became a symbol of renewal, transformation, and the possibility of life returning after death. The same idea appears in Dionysian rituals, where sacred springs and sources of water represent cleansing, awakening, and transformation. They symbolize the removal of an old identity and the beginning of a completely renewed existence. In Christianity, baptism carries a similar meaning. A person enters the water, symbolically experiencing death, and then rises again transformed, renewed, and spiritually reborn. So when these traditions are examined together, the same three powerful elements appear repeatedly. A bier or sacred bed, representing death and stillness. A cave, representing darkness, containment, and mystery. And water, representing rebirth and cosmic renewal. The Osireion contains all three, not only as religious ideas, not only as symbols, but physically built into the structure itself. It is not simply architecture, it is mythology transformed into stone. It is a ritual carved into granite, a resurrection story preserved within silence. Keith Hamilton, author of The Osireion, A Layman's Guide, describes the central island as something far more significant than a simple architectural feature. He writes, "The central island is seen as the primeval hill with a double set of steps. Upon this hill, Osiris was enthroned or entombed. This interpretation reveals why the central island holds such importance. The primeval hill was not merely a symbolic object. In ancient Egyptian belief, it represented the first land to emerge from the endless waters of creation. It was the mythical center where existence itself began, the sacred place where life first appeared, and the location where Osiris could be restored, enthroned, and transformed after death. The Osireion was not just built as a monument, it was designed as a physical representation of one of Egypt's most powerful ideas, that from darkness comes light, from death comes renewal, and from the end comes a new beginning. Could these discoveries about the Osireion be really what was expected, or more? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks for staying with us as we shared the mysteries surrounding the Osireion. Now we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on these discoveries? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to explore more stories. See you there.